Abuji,
We dedicate our Sanjha Punjab festival to Kamla Bhasin. Today we have Jerry Pinto and Amir Hussain in conversation with Ritu Menon, the author of Zohra, a biography in 4 acts. Zora is an elegant and insightful biography which traces the eventful journey of a remarkable and beloved artist, Zora Segal. The author, Ritu Menon, has been in publishing for over 35 years, the last 25 as a feminist publisher, having co-founded Kali for Women in 1984 and Women Unlimited in 2003. Her personal, professional, and political involvement with the women's movement in India and South Asia introduced her to activism for social change and opened up new vistas of research, writing, and publishing. She was awarded the Padma Shri by the Government of India in 2011. Jerry Pinto is a poet, writer, and translator. He has written a cinematic biography of Helen, the life and times of a Bollywood H-bomb, and has also helped Leela Naidu with her version of an autobiography, Leela, A Patchwork Life. He was awarded the Sahitya Academy Award in 2016 for his novel M and the Big Home. Amir Hussain is the author of several collections of short stories, including Insomnia, 37 Bridges, Love and Its Seasons, and Zindagi Se Pehle. 2 novels, including Another Gulmohar Tree and most recently Restless, a collection of autobiographical pieces. He's an essayist and columnist and writes in both English as well as Urdu. Before we begin our session, I would request our technical host to play a slideshow of Zora Segal's pictures. Chose adventure over tradition. When she was 18, traveling to Germany to learn modern dance. For the rest of her life, she continued to defy convention and was associated with transformative initiatives in the arts. In 1935, she was recruited by Uday Shankar and toured the world with his dance troupe. In 1943, she set up a unique dance school in Lahore with her husband. In Bombay, 2 years later, she joined Prithvi Theatres, founded by the legendary Prithviraj Kapoor. For the next 14 years, she traveled across India, taking socially relevant plays directly to the people. In 1962, Zora went to London on a drama scholarship and stayed on for 25 years, becoming a part of a tiny band of Asian artists. From here to her participation in pioneering TV series and films was a natural progression. Back in India, she was surprised to find Bollywood at her door when she was well past 80. Playing the unconventional grandmother, by turns charming and crusty, she became a household name. Once again, I welcome you all and I request Jerry to take the conversation further.
I was thinking in terms of it's been a good year of publishing, Ritu, with the Dress book coming before this and now suddenly Zora Segal as well, which I know is a project you've worked on for a long time. We've been hearing hints and sounds about this for many years. So I'd like you to just start by maybe telling us a little about what drew you to the project and what is your notion of the biography as a genre?
Thanks, Jerry. Thank you for, of course, being here. Thank you for agreeing to do this, and thank you, Amir, as well. I have known Zora for many years. I mean, I have known her for many years, since the mid-90s. We published her memoir, as you know. And over the years, she became something of a friend. I mean, it would be presumptuous of me to say friend, but actually she did become a friend. We used to meet all the time. She insisted that I was there at her birthday parties. We had lunch very often together and so on. And it seemed to me that here was a subject that was, here was a woman who was exceptional. And as a subject for a biography, she was actually quite unique. And the reason I say that is that I think, I know that she is the only woman, she was the only woman, she was the only person, the only artist in all the performing arts, except music. So dance, theater, film, television. At a time when very, very few people could straddle all the arts. She was also a woman who actually managed to do all this at a very particular conjuncture in all the arts. I mean, isn't that extraordinary? She should be with Uday Shankar when he was doing his experimenting and taking Indian dance into a direction that it had never been before. She was with Prithviraj Kapoor when he was breaking the mold. She turns up in England much before all our Bollywood stars and crossover films and so on and so forth, when multiculturalism was beginning to be articulated and programming was beginning to happen, taking into account a diaspora and a South Asian population that was now in its second generation. And here was this woman who happened to be at all these critical points in her own lifetime and making her own mark in each of them. I thought this was pretty extraordinary. And although she had talked about it in her own memoirs, the context in which all this was happening somehow had sort of receded into the background. So what I really wanted to do was to place her in her context and to see how she and her circumstances shaped each other. Now, biography. I think it's a very neglected genre in India. Very, very.
So is autobiography.
So is autobiography. Indeed.
Especially women's autobiographies.
Indeed. I could not agree with you more. And when I was seeing the rash of celebrity memoirs and sports people and sundry bureaucrats and politicians and you name it, writing, really almost off the cuff, I thought it's a good idea to see how a feminist biography can actually make some kind of comment, not only on the genre, but actually insist that we see these women for the extraordinary lives they led and the contribution they've made. And so, I started with Zora Segal because I thought she was pretty exceptional and also at a particular historical moment in the country's life. And similarly, Zohra Segal at another significant moment in the life of the arts in India. So it sort of came together. And I must say that it's been the greatest fun to do the research, to actually look at what was happening when she was on the stage, on screen, in dance, in theater, in this very rich 1930s to the end of the century, really. Not too many people have had that opportunity.
So, you say quite rightly that she lived through one of the most tumultuous of times in modern history and in India's history as well. How did you manage the balance between foreground and background? Because in the foreground is this really dominant figure, this fascinating woman who seems to be able to take the kind of risks that even today would seem almost breathtaking. A letter arrives saying, "Come and join my troupe, and we are going off on a."
Yes.
And she goes.
Yes.
So her
And
father allows her to go.
And she is allowed to go.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
So this is the foreground, and at the background there is like this magnificent surge of self, sort of self-determination for the Asian nations. There are momentous things happening all over the world. So I found that Zohra, your book Zohra, was a wonderful balancing act between this foreground and the background. And I was wondering whether it was an effort or a struggle to kind of keep the two in balance, as it were.
It was not so much a struggle as a kind of strategy, if you like. I didn't want to repeat anything that she had already written about herself. You see, I mean, repetition is the terrible thing in a biography, and as Lytton Strachey has said, it should never be a vulgar procession of detail. So I wasn't really, I didn't want to repeat anything that was well known, that was familiar. After all, she's a very beloved figure. She herself has given so many interviews. She's all over the place. I mean, the stories about her are larger than her life sometimes. And she, of course, is pretty large herself in terms of representing herself. I didn't want to do that. What I did want to do was to say that every life is lived against a backdrop, whether that backdrop is political, social, literary, cultural, whatever. And the life should be seen in relation to that. And so the attempt really was to be able to have the background and the foreground reinforce each other, rather than have one overshadow the other. And so it was a little bit of a challenge, I have to say that. But it was also a very creative challenge. I mean, it was something to be able to write that balance, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Can I come in with a question now?
Sure.
It's very close to what you've been talking about, but still I want to ask you, Ritu, when you had the memoir, you'd actually published the memoir, and I was intrigued to find that the memoir was actually claimed by someone else, by a co-writer who got all the kudos for it, etc., etc. But how much did you draw on the memoir? I deliberately didn't read it. I deliberately did not read it before reading your book. I've read it before, as you know, and I loved it. But I just thought you credited a lot of her family, her friends, etc., etc. But you don't actually have the memoir in your credits.
Not in the credits, but it's there. It's there in all the factual stuff that is in the book.
What do you think? What do you think she left out in the memoir that is in your book? Because as I said, I deliberately didn't read it again.
Sorry, what was that?
What did she leave out in the memoir?
Oh, she left out a great deal of what I then got from her colleagues, her friends, the people she worked with, the directors she worked with, the number of how should I say, associates who recalled her with great affection and with great regard.
Yep.
She doesn't have that in her book at all. And she doesn't have any of the very significant shifts that were taking place.
Yeah.
She actually wasn't even part of them, quite frankly. In England, she wasn't really part of all that was happening in theatre with the South Asian community, with the new groups that were beginning to find their voice. She was actually not part of that at all. Nevertheless, she was there at a time when all this was happening.
Yeah, well, that's how I knew her, because if I can bring in my own personal memories of Zohra as a performer, as an actor or actress, or whatever we're saying these days. I remember the first time I ever heard of her was when my uncle told me that he'd seen her in Guru, and she played a role, Mastani.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
And that was before I could ever see the film, because it had been shown at some film festival. And Bombay. Then I worked on Courtesans of Bombay after the whole thing was done. And there she was twinkling away, that I had been seeing her in various films and plays and so on. That was around the time she was in Jewel in the Crown. And then the other day, I told a friend of mine that I was reading your biography, an English writer and critic and so on. And she says, I remember Zohra Segal is this wonderful twinkling person who told us how to do lemon pickles. And I said the film was the film I watched.
Right.
The film I worked on, the film I worked on. And as you say, it was a rather incomplete film in some ways.
She was a pickle.
There she was. And I feel that Zohra Segal was in my life all the way through. When I came to London, I saw her in so many things. When I look at your assiduous and wonderful filmography, and your record of her TV performance and so on, I haven't seen all of them, but I've seen many. But since the age of 14, she's just always been a part of my life. Yet I don't remember ever meeting her. Never. So our paths must have crossed so many times, because you said, Varis Hussain was very helpful about so many things. Varis Hussain is the son of Atiya Hussain, whom we've talked about, who again had a diasporic life, etc., etc. And we worked on a book together about Atiya Hussain. But I mean, it's so fascinating.
Right.
I mean, Zohra's presence was greater than the number of movies or television programs we saw her in. We saw her in 5, 10, 15, but she was still, there, twinkling, shining.
The curious thing about working on her England years, that after all, the better part of her acting career was in England, was never in India, which is why that part of her life, of her performative life, is actually not very well known here, because of course we never got to see much of what she did. But the interesting thing is that actually that 20 or 25 years of performing life in England was an accumulation of small roles. She never ever did anything. She was never the leading lady. She couldn't be. I mean, she was in her mid-50s when she got there. There was no way that she could have been cast the way Madhur Jaffrey was cast, or the way Saeed Jaffrey was cast, or the way Roshan was cast, because they were in their 30s, 40s. She was about 60 plus by the time she got these roles. So her performing life, her film life, was actually made up of small roles. Now, this is the accomplishment. That small role became so
outshining,
so distinctive that roles began to be written for her. She was introduced into a film, into a television series, into a comedy, because of who she is.
I think,
I think is really
two things come to mind. The first is that obviously she is, even at the beginning of the career, a disruptive force. And the second is that she's broken into this great tapasya. And of course, the Apsaras did seem to have a certain strongly feminist kind of credo. They were in it for the fun and they were not in it for raising children. And off she's gone after that.
But, again, the very interesting thing is that, Zora was trained in movement, in eurythmics. She was not trained as a dancer. So in that respect, she and Uday Shankar were the same. Meaning, of course, he was not trained at all. He was trained as a painter, as an artist. And he sort of, ended up as a dancer, and as a very sort of innovative dancer. She trained, but she trained in eurythmics, not in dance. And yet, of course, she always said, I remember asking her once whether she missed that, that the fact that she didn't dance after she left Lahore, after the dance school wound up. And she said, what I miss is not being a teacher. So it was the teaching part of it that she really, and that's what she was doing at the Uday Shankar Dance Academy. Of course, she was part of the ensemble because he didn't have soloists, he just had an ensemble. But what she really loved was the teaching. And even with Prithviraj, she was hired as a teacher and a choreographer.
Yeah.
She was never supposed to dance. So
Can I ask a question?
Interesting thing, you know, she just sort of managed to make the most of whatever she was doing, even if it was slightly removed from what she had started out to do.
Yeah. Can I ask a question here? Where did her daughter Kiran finish her training? Because I saw Kiran dance many times without knowing she was Zohra Segal's daughter. But in your biography, I see that Kiran had a very kind of variegated career as well. She was not dedicated to dance. Rather like her mother, she was a kind of, polymath artist.
No, she trained as a dancer. She trained and she continued to train. And, I think that she was much more in the dance tradition than her mother. And she continued in it.
There were various other things she was doing all the time.
Also in England, but then she returned to India because she wanted to continue very seriously with dance. Didn't continue to live in Europe or in England for that matter. So I think that she pursued it with the kind of seriousness and single-mindedness without actually moving into anything else, in developing any of her other interests.
So where I was concentrating on Zora, I missed out where she went to train, because I saw Kiran dance for the first time in London, something like 1971 or 72.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've of course seen her perform many times here, but always with a troupe, again with her own troupe.
No, she was dancing solo here. So that connection is another one that I made much later, that she was Zora's daughter. I had no idea. So here were these people I was watching and admiring, and the biography brings all these things together, which is why it's so wonderful. And my next question is, you have social histories of art and theatre. It's India, it's Britain, it's theatre, it's dance, it's music, it's all kinds of things. Music, perhaps less.
Not so much, yeah.
But how was that research project? I think you did a lot of the work during the pandemic, didn't you? During lockdown?
No, fortunately not. No, in fact,
you've done it all before. Yeah.
It was actually completed much before that. Thank goodness. I mean, one of the problems I think now today for any writer who has to start with the research from now is going to be the difficulty of doing it, actually. That to me is a very big concern. How do you go about doing the research if you can't, if your mobility is so constrained? So, no, I had actually finished all that, finished the writing, most of the writing as well, although of course some revision took place while this pandemic is with us. But all the travel, the meeting of people, the locating them. After all, it's not just I who have to be able to meet them. They have to be able to meet me. They have to be willing to do that. It wouldn't have been possible in this pandemic time. So fortunately, it was done much before. But one of the things that was a pity was that a lot of the people whom she had been with in her early years are no longer alive. So it wasn't possible to get an insight into her, prior to, let's say, the 70s. Post that time, it was much easier, much more possible. But prior to that time, I just had to go by whatever people could recall.
Yeah, of course.
And also recall is something that you can't always trust. So it has to be corroborated. It has to be validated by either documentary material or, several people's recall, all of which actually came together in a much more organic way in England, where I did manage to meet several people who had worked with her, who remembered being with her, who
like
had
Waris Hussain.
Waris Hussain, her agents, her directors, Lou Wakefield, Ken McMullen, Jill Williams, any number of people who had worked with her, who had represented her, who had directed her. So that part of it was actually much more cohesive. And I was able to arrive at an understanding of her as an actor because I had that benefit of being able to talk to them. And that was a very worthwhile, very valuable input, which enabled that section of the book to be much more of a recollection at one level and a sort of historical reconstruction.
Which of course it is, yes.
Another level.
Yeah,
but the funny thing is, one of the problems I had, one of the challenges that I faced was, I never came across anyone who had anything unkind to say about her. Now, this is a problem, for a biographer, because you end up sounding like, a sort of chorus of praise. They were all very considered in their regard and their respect and their admiration for her. But I was waiting to hear something that actually had another kind of perspective on her as an actor.
Well, that perspective comes from herself when she says, I was terrible at Lily Chatterjee.
Yes. So
when I was looking at Lily Chatterjee, I can understand why she thought she was terrible. And I can also understand why a British director looking at her would have thought she was wonderful, because they wanted Lily Chatterjee to be terrible.
A caricature.
A caricature. And then Zohra, being, I think, a great director's actor, delivered a caricature.
Yes, absolutely.
And then discovered what she had done, looked at it and said, oh my God, is this what I did?
Right.
But I thought it was completely understandable that, that this character should be that way and should be celebrated for being that way. Lily Chatterjee as a name, you can tell, you can smell the contempt that is behind it.
Yeah. Where I think that she was a caricature and where it didn't really work is Bhaji on the Beach.
Oh, I hated that movie, by the way. I just hated it. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have
it was just over the top. The way she sort of portrayed Pushpa, I thought was a disservice to herself as well as to the character. And I was surprised that, she had been allowed to do that.
That's what was wanted at the time, Ritu. That's what people wanted.
Well,
I was living here. They wanted broad portrayals by Asians of Asian characters. The plays by Ayub Khandin, etc., etc. They were all like that.
But there were other things that she was in at not exactly the same time, but roughly the same time, where if the director allowed her a little bit of nuance, allowed her to shade the character a little bit, she did. After all, look at Guru. Mastani is a little bit of a caricature as well, but she pulls it off.
She's very much like an Ismat Chughtai character.
In that.
My mamu, my maternal uncle, just loved it. He said, God, this woman is so good.
But she managed to pull it off because she did it with a certain amount of subtlety. That subtlety was missing in her portrayal of Pushpa and Bhaji on the Beach, which I thought was, in a way, a pity because it was actually quite a breakthrough film. And then, of course, she was perfectly good in all the others. I mean, she was fine in Bend It Like Beckham and so on.
You can say she went OTT sometimes, but that's allowed.
She was. And she was brilliant in Firm Friends and in Tandoori Nights. She was really...
I haven't seen Firm Friends. I'm so sorry. I just realized looking at your assiduous filmography, how much of her I've missed. And I realized that, like, you and I are both literary people, so we can admire people for just writing 2 or 3 books. But she made so many films, and I can admire her for the 10 things I've seen her in, and that's enough, really, if that makes sense.
Yes, of course. But the thing is that, when she may have missed and regretted not being able to continue as a dancer, but I think that she thoroughly enjoyed being an actor and continued to act really almost till the last breath, almost.
I think someone early in this conversation in the comments said that they could not believe that she'd ever been young. Something to that effect. Because, we saw Zora Segal. I mean, I think Zora Segal sort of erupts into the Indian imagination as the Dadi, the Nani, but the Dadi and the Nani with a bit of spice, if you just wanted someone.
Yeah. Or as I said, not just spice, but spikiness.
With spikiness.
She never lost a chance to puncture that sort of, very masculine or very male kind of sense of entitlement. I mean, she was always laughing up her sleeve at it, even as she was actually, in a way, quite sort of taken with it. Meaning, I think it, towards the end, or even much before the end, she was actually looking at herself perform. She was looking at what she was doing. Mm-hmm. And after a point, it wasn't very clear whether she was being Zora or whether she was being the character she was playing. And in fact, even if you met her in person, which I used to do quite often, after a point, she was always performing. Even when she was telling you some story, some little snippet, some anecdote, it was performed. It was never just recounted. And I remember in a very sort of touching, poignant recall, one of the directors that she worked with said, Zora always retold the story of her husband's suicide in the same way. It never varied. She'd heard it 2 or 3 times, and it was always recounted. She cried at the same point. She paused at the same points. She delivered it with the same, with the same tone of voice and the same. And so she said that obviously it had become something that she did.
Yeah.
The fact had been already translated into.
Like Shia, Marcia, and Noha is always done in exactly the same way. Right. She was not Shia as far as I know. But that's the way it's done. You know how to do it, you know how to deliver it. And I think that being, part of Rampur, she was very familiar with all that, and she knew exactly how to do all that. But yeah, I can totally understand that. She knew the rituals.
Yeah, and she was ready for a performance anytime. I remember going to see her in the hospital once. She had been admitted for something. And Kiran was in Bombay, and she called me and she said, "Do you think you can go and see Amma?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I'll go." So I went, and she said, "Arey, abhi mat andar aao." So I thought, she's not feeling very well. So I waited outside for a couple of minutes, and then I went in, and she said, "Now you can see me." Arey, maine to dupatta hi nahi pehna tha theek tarah se. And then she said to me, "I want to write a book on the Andamans." I said, "What?" She said, "I want to write a book on the Andamans." I said, "But Zora, you've never been there." She said, "To usse kya farak padta hai?" And I mean, she was...
Andamans as in Kala Pani.
Kala Pani. She had no intention of doing any such thing. She was just performing for my benefit.
That's lovely.
There was no...
That's so lovely. But
So
you know, you were,
I just laughed and I said, I think it's a very good idea. आप अस्पताल से घर आ जाएं and then we can see how to do this. She said, मैंने कहा मैं तुमसे कह दूं
Described
पहले.
as a legend on this program. You had better be careful because you'll start performing your legend now.
nah, Ritu never does. But Ritu,
About
another
what,
thing
you said
that
about
you've just been, sorry to cut you, Jim.
about what
But
you
just
said
a
about
quick question. You've now been publishing so many legends. Ismat, about whom you told me this wonderful story about Kahani Sikki ke Mafik Hoti Hai. Annie Khala, you know, Urtul and Heather, and your Annie Appa, Zohra Segal, and that was a political biography. You had to do the whole political, you know, retroscena, you say in Italian, that screen, you know, that screen behind the door. And now her, and you've done a completely different screen. And then we did Atiyah Hussein's book together, where we also had to put a lot of biographical material together. So how do you shift from person to person? Because otherwise your interests have been literary. This time it became theatrical. Was it your love for her, your interest in her, or you know, was it the fact that you wanted to shift genres and do something completely different?
Yes, the last, Amir. I never want to repeat. I mean, my very first book was on the partition of India. It was an academic book. It was an oral history.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with literature. The second book was a study of Muslim women in India. It was a survey-based inquiry. It was a study of their status in the country. So I never.
But that's what literature is made of. Anyway.
Yeah, I know. But what I'm saying is, whatever I write, whatever little bit of writing I do, I really don't want to repeat myself. I'm not sure I'll do another biography again, because I think that, you know, after a time, you want to try something that allows you to stretch yourself a little bit.
One question I wanted to ask you before I pass on to Jerry again, which was going to be an early question, but of course these conversations are very spontaneous, and I think they should be allowed to flow, and this has flowed, was how did you come upon the structure of the book, which is brilliant? Act 1, Act 2. I know that it's, I mean, we can say, of course, it's to do with her being a theatrical person. But how did you come across it? You're not a theatrical person.
By accident, Ahmed. Really by accident. I mean, but when I came upon it, it just seemed to fit. It seemed somehow to be right. But
Brilliant.
I was confronted by two problems, which were the interregnums in her life when she was not performing. And they were two periods in Delhi where she was far removed from her performing self. And I didn't know how to deal with it. What am I to do with these years of her life where she's an administrator? She's got nothing to do with herself as a performer. And so I thought, okay, let me call it an intermission. And once that
Brilliantly managed. Brilliantly managed.
Then the rest became, it just fell into place.
Yeah.
There were two intermissions. Yeah. And then, of course, as I followed her career, I could see that there was a theatrical, there could be the way the scenes unfold, and you have the climax, and then you have the denouement, and then you have blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so yeah. But you're allowing her to have her moments of rest, her moments of peace, her moments of transition, which is wonderful. I think that book gives me this, it's wonderful.
It was interesting to see how it could have been structured that way. I mean, it was.
And sometimes it reads like a novel, honestly.
Well.
Okay, sorry, I said too much. So.
I was just wondering how you decided on the details you were going to keep and how you decided on what you were not going to keep. Because by the time you've come to her second, that second period of her life, her Bollywood stint, basically. You're moving very quickly. I mean, you move very quickly through the whole book. when, I mean, I saw the size of it, I was very relieved because I thought I was going to have to spend the rest of the year reading it. But, no, it is a long and very, very interesting life. And I remember when we are with her in Memphis and they're driving through, they seem to be driving through the whole of the world, literally, like, I mean, and
Yes.
you're done in 2 pages.
That's back in the 30s or something.
Yeah. And you're done in like 2.5 pages. I mean, that was amazing condensation. How did you
she'd already described it in very great detail in her account. And I thought, I really shouldn't be repeating it. It shouldn't read like I have just lifted sections out of there and put them down. So what I picked was the significant parts. The part where she decides she's going to be Isadora Duncan. The part where she decides that, she's not going to go to England to become a pilot. She's going to go to Europe to become a dancer. I mean, how extraordinary is that? For an 18-year-old, 1935, to think that I'm going to a country where I don't know anyone, I don't know the language, there's no such thing as a telephone, there's no such thing as instant communication, and I'm going to do something I've never done before, and I'm already 18 years old. So
I can't think of any other Indian woman who did that.
Really, honestly, unless there were the rare one who went to study medicine, perhaps. I mean, we do know that there were a few who did that. Okay, but no one in the arts was doing that.
Well, Atiya Hussain came much later.
So the thing
Atiya Hussain never made those breakthroughs that Zora made.
Precisely. So the question of choosing really was to look what I called the decisive moments in her life. To cut out after all, every life is full of a whole lot of detail. That is the everydayness of it, the repetitive nature of a daily life, which of course is what it's made up of, but it's terribly boring if you have to write it. The one thing I must sort of emphasize is my horror of a boring story. I cannot tell you how many biographies I have put down because I'm not interested in whether Thomas Hardy had a glass of milk before he walked to school. It really matters very little to me. But I am very interested in what I call those decisive moments, the turning points. Those need to be highlighted. Whereas if I put in a lot of detail, the significant moment doesn't get highlighted. So I know it's a problem. A lot of people, in fact, even Ravi Singh said to me, why are you rushing through the first? And I said, look, it's not rushing through. It's trying to focus on what was really important to her at that point. What I wanted to highlight there was the absolute gutsiness of this young woman. So the letters she was writing, the travel that she did, the decisions that she made, the relationships that she had, the choices that she sort of, in almost in an impulsive way. After all, it was impulse. That to me was something that I wanted to highlight, rather than a lot of family detail. For example, there's a lot of family detail that could have come in, a lot. But what I missed was not being able to talk in detail or at much greater length about her relationship with Uzra, her sister, to whom
that's beautifully done. No, Ritu, that's beautifully done.
But not in as much detail as I would like to, because a very deep relationship. It was a very, very important relationship for her. Whereas I didn't find that with her friends. She had friends. It's not that she didn't, but the depth of her relationship with Uzra is something that actually I was able to reconstruct via Prithviraj Kapoor. It's very interesting. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting that triangular relationship actually becomes a kind of possibility. So I thought, okay, let me see if that's a kind of something that I might try
And
to.
I'd like to add something to that, which is that Ismat Tukhtai, Kuratun and Haider all managed to go back to Pakistan very often, and so did she. That's also great. Much as they were nationalists and so on and so forth, they felt that Pakistan welcomed them. They felt that Pakistan accorded them this great kind of honor and so on and so forth. And I'm so glad you brought this into the biography.
The important thing was that she was able to.
Like they do you, actually, Ritu.
Sorry?
When you come to Pakistan, you're also welcomed hugely.
Of course, absolutely. I mean, I see no difference, and certainly the whole point of this Sanjha Punjab is actually to highlight that at that level there is absolutely no doubt about the camaraderie and the very great and deep affection and regard and commonality, frankly.
And understanding of each other's work
about Zora was that she was actually able to perform there. These were Zia-ul Haq years. There was a great sort of suspicion of the performing arts.
That's a great part of the biography, which I don't think is an autobiography very much.
Not a lot, not at all. No, because it stops before she actually started going often to Pakistan. It was mainly in the 90s that she was traveling there.
No,
of course, she was always performing in private spaces, but still, to be able to do that, to be able to perform with her sister in Lahore, in Karachi, it was something quite remarkable, I think. And that,
absolutely, I think that's wonderful. That's why this long span of the life that you presented in the biography is just remarkable. It's remarkable. You give her last years as much importance as you do to her early years. I think that's really good.
Ritu, just a question. Why did you not feel at liberty to talk about your reservations on Baji on the Beach, about that performance?
I did say that it was a caricature.
Yeah, but I think you move very quickly over it. And for many people, Baji on the Beach was like her breakout moment.
Yes.
Oh, no.
From the darkness of being that, that that sneeze and you miss her moment. Suddenly she was like all over the screen. And did she ever know that you felt that way about her performance?
Sorry, what?
Did Zohra know that you felt that way about her performance?
No. I never discussed her performances with her. I didn't. What I missed most of all while working on this was not being able to talk to her at all.
No.
Although I had known her and met her and talked to her about all sorts of things, including, the lack of professionalism in Hindi cinema and so on and so forth, which she spoke. But I wasn't able to talk to her the way I wanted to, because of course I had no thought that I would be doing this while she was alive. And I would have talked to her about many, many things, which I'm not able to do, which I wasn't able to do. And as I don't like to speculate, I cannot touch on many things, question marks. I asked so many of her friends, I asked her family members, did she have no special relationship after Kameshwar died? Was there never a person in her life with whom she had, a kind of a companionship? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A very close friendship. And every single one of them said to me, they did not know that there was such a relation. Now, I would have liked to have asked her about that. And I would have then been able to, I think, fill in a few blanks in her life. And there are blanks in her life. It's not as though it's a completely open, it's not an open book. There are many things that I would have asked her. I would have asked her about her relationship with Kameshwar. I would have asked her about her relationship with Prithviraj Kapoor. I would have asked her about several, there would be many other things that I would have liked to have talked to her about, even about Uday Shankar, for heaven's sake. Now, that was a real loss. I mean, that is a gap. It's a very real gap. I was able to do that with Nayanthara, for example. That's the benefit of having someone who's a living subject, rather than someone who's no longer alive, even though I may have known her. But I'm not able to talk to her in the way that I was able to talk to her family, for example. So,
I think someone asked a question about Zohra's political leanings.
As far as I'm aware, she was quite apolitical. The one political thing she did in her life was to remain in India and not go to Pakistan, whereas the rest of her siblings all went, except for her older sister and her father. The three of them remained in India. The rest of the family moved to Pakistan in 47, 48, and a little later. I mean, Uzra went in the early 50s. Uzra went twice, actually. That was a political choice she made, definitely. After all, she and Kameshwar were in Lahore. They could have stayed on.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But they chose to before 47, of course, but they chose to remain in India. Now, at the time that she was with IPTA in Bombay, and I think I've mentioned this in the book, P.C. Joshi did ask her whether she would take charge of the cultural squad, and she said no. She said, my interest is in acting, not in political work. And even though she was very, very sympathetic to the work that Sehmat and other groups were doing, she was not political in her engagement with them. She was there as an artist. So as far as I know, she was, in that sense, apolitical.
I was wondering,
her father died in Pakistan.
Her father died in Pakistan, yes.
He did go in his last
Yes, when he was much older, he was one of his sons, the one in Karachi, said that he should no longer live alone in Dehradun, which is where he was, but go to him in Karachi.
See, one of the great things about your book was I knew she went to Pakistan a couple of times, but I didn't know how often she was going there.
Yes, she went several times. Largely because of Madiha, I have to say, Madiha Gohar and Shahid Nadeem and Ajoka, their theatre group.
And that lovely line you have in the book that says that I just, that she was just fulfilled when she went there as well. I'm
Right.
so happy and glad that she did that.
Yeah.
She had good audiences. Nobody would ever have discriminated against her there. So that's bringing together two countries, or three countries that she operated in.
Yes.
But I'm so interested that you say that she left England and she never really felt at home in England. And yet she decided to stay on, and you give a reason that was pragmatism. But there seems to be something missing there in the sense, why did she decide to stay on in this country and live this bleak life here?
Two reasons.
Very bleak life.
She was very pragmatic, Amir. I mean, I used to go and see her at lunchtime, and she would be having a cup of soup and a sandwich. Mm-hmm. And I said, ZOHRA-A, is this all the lunch you're going to have? She said, हाँ, और खुद बनाती हूँ मैं. She was very, very practical. She was very pragmatic. The children's education, the fact that she knew that there was not much that she could do in India, striking out and trying to make it for herself in England. I think once she had made the decision, she just decided, I'm going to go ahead with it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sort of keep trying in different places and different countries. And that to me was another very remarkable, very, very unusual.
Remarkable. Because I mean, the other people who did that were males, I
remember when I was speaking to Roshan Seth about her, and he said, look, the thing about Zora is that she persevered. A lot of us didn't. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, she was willing to take whatever role she was given. We were not. He said, Saeed didn't, I didn't. We wanted the good roles. And if we weren't getting the good roles, we weren't going to stay on. So, I mean, there is a way in which she understood the context in which she was working. And she seized whichever opportunity came her way.
But do you think it left
Awfully
scars?
painful as well.
Sorry?
Yeah, sorry, Jay.
Do you think this whole time, this 25 years in a desert, do you think it left scars on her in any way?
I would have liked to have asked her that. I would really dearly have loved to ask her that.
Because, in Bombay, she had this reputation of being really tough on money.
Oh, yes. She always said, I'm a Pathan, hum to hote hi hain kanjoos. She always said that. When we, I must tell you a very funny story. When we published when we published Stages, the first book, I think it was Sunil Sethi. Yes, he was with India Today at the time. And he called her up and he said he'd like to do an interview with her. This was in 1990 something, 6, 7, I can't remember now. She said, "Haan, theek hai, 3,000 rupees lagenge." He was completely shocked. He rang me up and he said, in all my years as a journalist, never has someone asked to be paid. They usually want to pay us. So what's the problem? So I said, I don't know, let me ask her. So I called her up and I said, Zohra-A, ये कह रहे हैं कि वो आपके साथ बात करना चाह रहे हैं, लेकिन आपने उनसे कहा कि पहले 3,000 रुपए रखो और फिर बात शुरू. She said, हाँ. अरे मेरा टाइम है. So I said, no, but Zohra-A, this is your book. ये आपकी किताब के बारे में बात करना चाह रही हूँ. You can't charge them for that. She said, अच्छा तो ऐसे करो. You tell them कि जब वो मेरे से बात करना चाहे ना, they should just say कि हमें रितु ने भेजा है. और फिर मैं समझ लूंगी कि ये मेरी किताब के बारे में बात करना चाह रहे हैं. But otherwise, she said, I will charge. So
otherwise, you told me about Ismat Chughtai that she said my stories are like coins.
Yes.
They go everywhere. She never charged about them. Yeah.
Never charged a penny, never got a penny, nothing. Okay. But I'm saying, so this business of being very mindful of money came because she lived a life of frugality in England.
That's so painful. That is such a painful element of biography, what she had to do. For me, that's so painful.
So
I thought she was just, this actor who managed to do so many things.
No, she had a hard life. Yeah. And she was and she told me once, she said, of course she got a pension from Equity and so on. She was pensioned because she was
later
a union member. But she said, we are 4 generations of women in one household. And so it was very much a part of her sense of economy and householding and so on.
Excellent. That's such a beautiful thing. It's the way women use, whatever they have, whatever talents they have, to make a living for themselves. It comes through in this book, which is beautiful, really wonderful.
When I asked her once how she had, I think I mentioned this in the book as well, how she managed to go through with all this adversity, her husband's suicide, Kiran's divorce, all sorts of things, and yet sort of remain positive and, very willing to move on. And she said, I have lived by one principle in my life. I never look back and I have no regrets.
I remember this very clearly.
I would have liked to have asked her about that in some greater detail. Because I am not sure that, of course, she said that and she lived that. She did live that to the best of her abilities, which were considerable. But I would have liked to have to have talked to her a little bit more about that.
One
When
last
everyone
question I
says
wanted to
hi-
ask you before we go on to, sorry, Jay. Did her children mind their lives being explored in the book?
Yeah. No. Kiran has read the book and she said she was extremely, she enjoyed it very much. I haven't spoken to the son because he's in the US at the moment, but he has the book and they certainly didn't hesitate to speak about it, to speak to me about it. So,
Okay, that's my last question. So.
Jerry was going to say something.
Yeah, we've just spotted a cockroach. So after this thing is dead. Sorry. These things happen in Bombay also. Okay. No, I was just reminded, when I was talking about the money thing, about how Shanta Apte, who was a great performer, told Vandana Mishra, whose book I translated, she said to her, make sure you get your money before you go on stage. Don't put on your makeup till your advance is on the table in front of you.
It's very interesting that you say that, because at one point Zora rang me up and she said there was some person who I'm forgetting his name now, a director who wanted her in his play. So she said, मैंने उसको कह दिया कि मैं wheelchair में आऊंगी. I mean, she was 97 or 98 at that point. मैं wheelchair पे आऊंगी, मेरे साथ एक attendant होगा और मुझे 5 लाख चाहिए. So I said, Zorapa, how long does he want you to be on stage for? She said, पता नहीं 5-7 मिनट कुछ ऐसा ही होगा. रोल तो उसने मुझे बताया नहीं अभी. I said, तो अगर रोल नहीं बताया तो आपने 5 लाख कैसे कह दिया? She said, क्यों ज्यादा कहा मैंने? Then a few days later she called me and she said, उसका दोबारा फोन नहीं आया. शायद मैंने ज्यादा ही.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, but turning up in an in a Amir Raza production, for instance, that one that you discuss. I think one of the the scars I thought was that this, having lived in the desert for so long, everything looks like an oasis. So she just took things that perhaps.
Yes, no, she did, and she loved to perform, Jerry. There's no two ways about it. She loved to perform. I mean, she was no shy retiring violet who was going to hang up her boots. No way. Yeah. She was going to perform to her last breath.
Yeah, I know. And there was that knowingness, I think, towards the end of her career, which you, I think, have discussed. The fact that she was watching herself. She was also watching us, watching her.
Of course.
And she was loving the fact that we were falling in love with her again and again.
And she kept saying, everything I do is for an audience. She was so open about it. She said, everything I do. So even a visitor who went to see her became her audience. There were a few times when she would always say, when I went to see her, she would say, pass out. मैं hearing aid जरा लगा लूँ ना, तो फिर मुझे बिल्कुल अच्छी तरह से सुनाई देगा. And then she would be in full flow. She could hear herself, she could hear me, she could hear everybody else, and then she was on a stage again. Actually, it was lovely because it was always so amusing.
Of course, yeah. That's the thing.
She was up for a laugh at any moment. She always said when she was 101 years old, she rang up and said, 100 plus 1. Rampur jaldi aana tum. I said, kyun? Because she was all her friends. I said, nahi Zora appa, main kya karungi aapke yahan sari aapki saheli. She said, nahi, tum jaldi aana. You and I will start our wine early before everybody else comes. I mean,
should we perhaps ask for some questions if there are any?
I don't think there don't seem to be any questions. There's just lots of stories and people reminiscing.
Great. That's good. That was a wonderful session, Ritu. Your
Thank
book
you.
has brought alive
Thank
this
you, both
person.
of you.
This book has brought alive a personality who managed to make it through all odds, and who from the margins just twinkled and then shone and then sparkled and then shone. And it goes on that way. It goes to show how women, Asians, all sorts of people can push through barriers, and how you can come home, and there is a home to come to, which he did. So it's a real achievement. It's a real achievement.
And if I may just suggest, if you want to buy Zohra, please use the local bookshop near you. Don't use that Amazon link. All right, go on to the Women Unlimited site and order your copies from there directly.
No, it's
not Women
I'm
Unlimited.
Not the publisher.
It's Speaking
It's Speaking Tiger.
Speaking Tiger.
It's no publisher. It's not. I haven't published. It's Speaking Tiger.
Okay. Oh, but if you write to Women Unlimited, surely you're not going to
direct them to Speaking Tiger. But yes, do go to your local bookshop.
Yeah. And you might find another couple of books that you'd like to read as well, which is an added advantage.
That's right.
Thank you very much, Amir. Thank you very much, Ritu and Jerry, for being here. And I'm going to ask Indu Arora, who is part of our team, to say a formal thank you.
5,000 भेज देना हाँ प्रीति
हाँ क्या किसको भेजूं
5,000 भेज देना छपी कितनी है
जेरी कम एंड यार पूरा खरीद लो आ जाओ
आ जाएंगे
आ जाओ माजा हाउस
Good evening everyone, good evening, and what a wonderful session, remembering Zora and reliving the whole book. And thank you Ritu Menon, Jerry Pinto and Amir Hussain. And I love the words that she said, I never look back and I never regret anything. And today we talk about women empowerment, but I think in those days the women broke all barriers and reached heights for which they were applauded, for which they are applauded and appreciated today. And she lives in our hearts. Thank you so much.
Great.
And good night, everybody.
Thank you.